Hello everyone. Human beings have a natural tendency to believe in the law of cause and effect, that good people will eventually be rewarded, and wrongdoers will face the consequences they deserve. That's why stories of revenge in the name of justice always have such a powerful appeal to us. André Bamberger was a French accountant. He once had a beautiful wife and a happy family with 2 children, a boy and a girl. Unfortunately, his first marriage ended in heartbreak when his wife had an affair. It took him a long time to recover from that pain. By 1982, at the age of 44, André's career was thriving and he had found love again. It should have been a fresh start for this man's life, but just as things seemed to be falling into place, something completely unexpected happened. At 11 a.m. on July 10, 1982, the phone in André's house in France suddenly rang. On the other end was Danny, his current wife, sobbing uncontrollably. She gave him devastating news his only daughter, Kalinka, had passed away in her sleep the night before. The news shattered André. Just a few days earlier, he had seen Kalinka, off to Germany to spend the summer at his ex-wife's home. Kalinka was a healthy, sporty, cheerful girl. Her sudden death was both shocking and suspicious to him. Without hesitation, André packed his bags and set off for Germany. Kalinka died on the night of July 9th, while sleeping in her bed. The first person to discover her lifeless body was her stepfather, Dieter. According to his account, around 7:30 p.m. that evening, as he usually did, he gave Kalinka an injection of a compound containing iron and calcium to help improve her skin and treat anemia. After that, he told her to go to bed early. A few hours later, noticing the light in her room was still on, Dieter checked in on her again. Kalinka mentioned she had a bit of a headache and asked him for a sleeping pill. Thinking nothing of it, he gave her the medication and returned to his room. The next morning, when he went in to wake Kalinka, he found her unresponsive and not breathing. In a panic, he tried chest compressions and gave her an emergency cardiac injection. But it was no use. Kalinka was gone forever. Dieter was a well-known cardiologist in Germany. Although he and André had been on tense terms for many years due to Danny's affair, he had been living with Danny and the 2 children for the past 7 years. Over time, Kalinka had gradually grown closer to her stepfather. This wasn't the first time she had received iron supplements. Her dosage had always been carefully monitored. According to Dieter and a few other physicians, it was likely that Kalinka had suffered from heat stroke or a cardiac issue after spending too much time in the swimming pool on an extremely hot day. Her death was classified as a medical accident, and her body was examined in Germany before being returned to France for burial. Just like that, a young girl in the prime of her life was gone, leaving behind immense grief and an irreplaceable void for her family. But for André, the situation felt far more complicated. When he saw his daughter lying motionless in the coffin, André felt like the world had stopped. He couldn't accept that the vibrant, full-of-life girl he had just sent off a few days earlier was now reduced to a cold, lifeless body. Standing at her grave, he lost all sense of time and place. The world around him blurred into a haze of heartbreak and disbelief. After the funeral ended, he couldn't even remember how he made his way out of the cemetery. 3 months after Kalinka's death, following repeated requests, André finally received a copy of the autopsy report. The entire document was written in German. He immediately found someone to translate it into French. As he read through the report, André came across several deeply troubling details. First, the estimated time of death was around 3 a.m. on July 10th, with the cause of death listed as undetermined. Second, in the hours leading up to her death, Kalinka had been injected with an unidentified substance, but the autopsy team could not determine what it was. Third, around 4 to 5 hours after she died, that is, the following morning, she was given another injection, this time a cardiac stimulant. But the most shocking detail appeared at the very end of the report. Kalinka's genital area showed signs of a fresh tear, along with traces of blood. Inside, there was a thick white fluid with a strange odor. However, the report made no mention of testing this substance, nor did it explain why it was there. In fact, there was no definitive conclusion on what drug had been administered or what caused her death. The report also floated several vague possibilities such as congenital heart disease, trauma from childhood injuries, or even drug use on Kalinka's part, but none of these theories were backed by any concrete evidence. Andrei couldn't believe what he was reading. He wasn't a doctor, but even he could tell that Kalinka had likely had sexual intercourse before her death, and that her passing might not have been a tragic accident after all. Shocked and outraged, Andrei immediately traveled to Germany in search of answers. He quickly located the forensic doctor who had performed the autopsy, but the response he received was chilling. The fluid sample found in Kalinka's body had not been preserved. No tests had ever been conducted to determine what it was. The case had already been closed. There was no way to reopen the investigation. With a growing sense that something was terribly wrong, Andrei decided to launch his own investigation. He asked questions everywhere he could and eventually uncovered a crucial piece of information. During the autopsy, Dieter Kalinka's stepfather had been present at the scene, involved in the process as a party connected to the case. More than that, Dieter had been the only person with Kalinka on the night she died. He had injected her with medication without any doctor's prescription. When she didn't wake up, he administered a cardiac stimulant hours after she had already passed. And most disturbingly, he was present during the autopsy, a presence that was not only unnecessary, but completely inappropriate. The questions kept piling up. Why would an experienced doctor like Dieter behave this way? Was he trying to save her, or was he covering something up? A terrifying possibility began to take shape in Andrei's mind. Kalinka didn't die from natural causes. She may have been sexually assaulted by Dieter and then silenced to ensure the truth never came out. Consumed by suspicion, Andrei confronted Dieter directly. But the man calmly denied everything, acting genuinely surprised by the accusations. Andrei's ex-wife also refused to believe it, dismissing the idea as a terrible misunderstanding, but Dieter was no ordinary man. He had once worked for the German Foreign Ministry and maintained strong connections within the local political and medical communities. Andrei, on the other hand, was just a French accountant, utterly alone in a foreign country, with no support, and no one to back him up. He went to the police, demanding that the case be reopened, but they refused. He turned to the prosecutor's office, requesting a re-examination of the remaining samples from the autopsy, but that too was rejected. Out of options, Andrei began distributing flyers on the streets, calling for public attention, hoping to put pressure on the authorities. But shortly after, he was arrested, charged with defamation. Not only had he failed to reopen the investigation, Andrei now faced another devastating blow. He was ordered to pay damages to the very man he believed had killed his daughter. The German legal system dismissed all attempts to revisit the case, slamming the door of justice in the face of a father screaming in desperation. Realizing he would never find justice in Germany, Andrei returned to France. But instead of giving up, he made a decision to wage a long and grueling battle. He poured all his money and time into hiring the best lawyers, specialists in cross-border criminal cases to reinvestigate Kalinka's death. However, the investigation was riddled with obstacles. German authorities refused to release the samples from the original autopsy, making it impossible to verify the cause of death. Andrei came to a painful realization. If he wanted new evidence, he would have to go out and find it himself. By 1985, after more than 2 years of being blocked at every turn, he made an agonizing decision to exhume his daughter's body for a second autopsy. But when the new forensic team began their examination, they made a horrifying discovery. Kalinka's entire genital area had been removed. Andrei trembled as he looked at his daughter's mutilated body. This only deepened his suspicions. There was no way she had died of natural causes. Andrei immediately contacted the officials responsible for the first autopsy and demanded that they provide the missing organs. The response he received was almost unbelievable. The removed tissue had been accidentally misplaced. That was the final straw. Andrei knew then that this wasn't just a careless mistake. There was no doubt left in his mind. The truth about his daughter's death had been buried from the very beginning. Speechless with rage, Andrei began reaching out to various organizations and used his legal team to apply mounting pressure. Faced with undeniable errors and mounting scrutiny, the forensic authorities finally relented. They agreed to release a few remaining tissue samples from the original autopsy. By this point, it was already 1988, 6 years after Kalinka's death. After examining the remaining tissue samples, the forensic team became nearly certain that Kalinka had died due to food from her stomach regurgitating into her windpipe, causing her to suffocate. This could only have happened if she had fallen into a deep coma, and it was clear that this condition was linked to the injection Dieter had given her. However, because so much time had passed, the remaining samples weren't sufficient to identify exactly what drug had been used. Still, if it could be proven that Kalinka's death was connected to the injection Dieter administered, the case could finally move forward. After years of relentless struggle, André finally saw a glimmer of hope. He brought all the evidence to the Paris Criminal Court. In 1995, the court finally opened the trial. Based on the available evidence, the court found Dieter guilty of intentional bodily harm leading to involuntary manslaughter and sentenced him to 15 years in prison. After all the hardship, André had finally secured a legal judgment in his favor, though it still didn't feel like complete justice. The problem now was that Dieter hadn't attended the trial. To enforce the sentence, France would need to request his extradition. However, Germany was highly reluctant to extradite its citizens, especially someone with deep political ties like Dieter. Even though France issued an international arrest warrant, Germany repeatedly refused the request, citing concerns that French prison conditions did not meet human rights standards. What made the situation even more outrageous was that, because the trial in France had been conducted in Dieter's absence, he was never given the opportunity to defend himself. On that basis, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that France had violated the defendant's rights and ordered the French government to compensate Dieter with 10,000 francs. What had started as a father's pursuit of justice for his murdered daughter had now escalated into a complicated diplomatic standoff between two nations. The grieving father, who had already lost his child, was now caught in a seemingly endless legal battle to bring her suspected killer to justice. Just when the case seemed to be reaching a conclusion, it once again collapsed into deadlock. Then, in 1997, after years of chasing justice, André suddenly received shocking news. Dieter had been arrested in Germany, accused of sexually abusing an underage patient in his own clinic. As soon as he heard, André rushed to attend the trial, hoping that this would finally be the chance to expose the truth about his daughter's death. According to the plaintiff's testimony, Dieter told the girl that iron deficiency could lead to several negative symptoms in the body, and that it also affected the skin, making it impossible for it to look healthy. Based on his diagnosis, he recommended an iron supplement injection as treatment. With his gentle demeanor and reputation as a respected doctor, Dieter quickly gained the girl's full trust, and she agreed to the procedure. However, right after being injected, the girl quickly began to lose consciousness. Perhaps due to her unique physical response, she didn't completely black out. Before everything turned hazy, she caught a terrifying glimpse. Dieter was completely naked and on top of her. From the victim's account, it was clear that the sequence of events mirrored exactly what had happened to Kalinka, from the suggestion of an iron injection to the loss of consciousness and ultimately the sexual assault. Even more shocking was what followed the trial. Several other victims came forward, claiming they had experienced the exact same thing with Dieter. He was a serial offender. And finally, André understood the full truth about what had happened to his daughter. For the first time in over a decade, he had a living victim's testimony that confirmed what he had long suspected. Dieter had targeted Kalinka, using his role as both a doctor and a stepfather to deceive her into receiving a sedative injection. Then he carried out the assault. But the tragedy didn't end there. During the attack, possibly due to the violent trauma and the unbearable pain, Kalinka reacted by vomiting. The food in her stomach regurgitated into her windpipe, and she suffocated to death. Even more horrifying was that Dieter knew she was dead, but he acted as though nothing had happened. The next morning, he even injected a heart stimulant into her lifeless body, likely in an attempt to confuse the results of the autopsy. He then used his connections to be present during the forensic examination, manipulating the process to cover up and destroy any remaining evidence. However, due to a lack of solid evidence and the plaintiff being in a confused mental state at the time, Dieter was only stripped of his medical license in Germany and received a suspended 2-year prison sentence. Watching the man who had murdered his daughter walk free, Andre couldn't take it anymore. He quit his job, shut down his company, and devoted the rest of his life to seeking justice for his child. He sold his home, poured all his assets into hiring lawyers, and even began studying law himself to fight to the very end. He handed out flyers on the streets, wrote letters to the justice ministers of France and Germany, and reached out to influential politicians hoping to put pressure on both governments to force Dieter to face the consequences of his crime. Since 1982, to avoid Andre's relentless pursuit, Dieter had moved house more than a dozen times. But no matter where he tried to hide, Andre always managed to find him, like a ghost that refused to let go. By 1998, 16 years had passed since Kalinka's death. Andre's ex-wife believed he had become too obsessed and no longer wanted to be involved in the case. His new girlfriend left him for the same reason. The French authorities were reluctant to take strong action, fearing diplomatic fallout, while Germany kept coming up with excuses to avoid extraditing Dieter. Time dragged on, but the case remained stuck in limbo. If nothing changed, by 2012 the statute of limitations for Kalinka's case would expire. At that point, Dieter wouldn't just be a free man, he could even turn around and sue Andre for harassment. On the night of October 17, 2009, police in Mulhouse, France received an emergency call. The caller reported that an international fugitive had been tied up in the middle of the street. Police rushed to the scene and found a man tightly bound to a fence, his face covered in blood. As they moved in closer, they realized it was Dieter, the man who had evaded justice for years. It didn't take long for the police to discover who was behind it. They raided a nearby hotel and arrested Andre. He was sitting in his room, strangely calm, as if everything had gone exactly according to plan. His bags were packed. He sat there waiting quietly for the police to come. After countless failed attempts to obtain an extradition order, and with the statute of limitations rapidly approaching, Andre made a bold, desperate decision. He paid $20,000 to hire a group of criminals to knock Dieter unconscious, smuggle him across the German border, and bring him to France. He was willing to commit a crime himself if that was what it took to carry out the sentence that the French justice system had failed to enforce for decades. After 27 relentless years of fighting, Andre finally succeeded through extreme means in bringing his daughter's killer back to France to face justice. The capture of Dieter and the arrest of Andre sent shockwaves through French society. The story of a father who spent his life tracking down a murderer, selling everything and sacrificing all in pursuit of justice for his daughter, captured the attention of the media and the public alike. This time, it was Germany demanding that France release Dieter and extradite the men who had kidnapped him, but France refused. On March 28, 2011, the Paris court officially reopened the case, honoring the previous ruling, and ordered Dieter to be imprisoned. After nearly 30 years, Dieter was finally locked behind bars in France. Andre's trial followed shortly after. Charged with kidnapping, he faced up to 15 years in prison. But the court acknowledged that his actions had been driven by a desperate pursuit of justice. In the end, the jury delivered a sentence of 1 year suspended. When he walked out of the courthouse, Andre was 74 years old. The once tidy and disciplined accountant was now aged and weary. And as he heard the court sentence Dieter at last, he couldn't hold back his tears. Someone asked him, "You spent 30 years of your life just to get 15 years in prison for the killer. Was it worth it?" He replied, "As long as I found justice for my daughter, it was all worth it." In 2012, Andre returned to Kalinka's grave. He gently whispered to her headstone, "I kept my promise." In his final years, he lived quietly in the outskirts of Toulouse, near where Kalinka rested. After dedicating half a lifetime to seeking justice, Andre finally found peace. Andre Bamberger's story isn't just about the pursuit of justice, it's a testament to the power of unconditional love. He spent his entire life chasing a truth that the legal system had turned its back on. Sometimes, justice doesn't come on its own. It belongs to those who are brave enough to chase it until the end. And though the price was a lifetime of sacrifice, Andre proved that truth can be buried, but it can never be erased. What do you think about this case? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. High-end residential neighborhoods are often associated with safety places where people can enjoy life without constantly looking over their shoulders. But even in the most secure communities, tragedy can still strike. In 2015, in one of these upscale neighborhoods home to many successful individuals, a young dentist who had just found love was met with unspeakable tragedy. At first, it seemed like a random act of violence. But as the police began their investigation, they quickly realized the case was far more complicated than it first appeared. The story unfolds in Dallas, the 9th largest city in the United States, located in northeastern Texas. With its well-developed transportation network, Dallas has become a major hub for finance, healthcare, and education in the southern U.S. One of its most vibrant areas is Uptown, known for its upscale restaurants, shopping centers, office towers, and luxury apartment buildings. With over 68% of its residents holding a college degree or higher, Uptown is home to a highly educated and professional population. Yet, it was here right in the heart of this seemingly safe and sophisticated district that a horrifying murder took place. The central figure of this story is Kendra Hatcher, a 35-year-old dentist known for her vibrant energy and zest for life. She lived in a luxury apartment in Uptown, enjoying the modern lifestyle she had worked so hard to build. Born in 1980 in Springfield, Illinois, Kendra grew up in a modest family but always stood out for her intelligence and outgoing nature. She wasn't just a top student, she also led both the cheerleading and volleyball teams at her high school. To her friends and teachers, she was a true star. After graduating from DePauw University, Kendra pursued her passion for dentistry and earned her Doctor of Dental Surgery degree from the University of Kentucky. Following her internship and becoming a licensed dentist, she dedicated herself fully to her profession. She was also deeply committed to charity work, once traveling to Ecuador to provide free dental care to underprivileged children. Beyond her professional life, Kendra was a passionate animal lover. She had a kind heart and would never harm any living creature, not even a tiny ant. Whenever she saw stray cats or dogs on the street, she'd often stop to pet them or give them food. Her warm, friendly personality made her beloved among her peers, and her presence always seemed to bring joy and light wherever she went. But no matter how kind or compassionate a person may be, life's storms can still find their way to them. Even with a kind and gentle heart, Kendra wasn't immune to the ups and downs of life. She had gone through a painful divorce that left her in a period of sadness and soul-searching. Hoping for a fresh start, she moved to Dallas in 2010, rented a luxury apartment, and began building her life anew. There, she quickly landed a job in dentistry, something she was truly passionate about. After years of dedication and hard work, Kendra had finally found stability. She had a fulfilling career, a solid group of friends, weekends spent shopping, nights out at trendy bars, yoga classes, and fitness sessions. Her life was full except for one thing. She was still searching for a partner to share it with. In May 2015, on a quiet day, Kendra opened a dating app, just browsing to pass the time. That's when she came across a profile that caught her eye, a young man with a vibrant look and a confident smile. What drew her in even more was his bio. "I've fulfilled my childhood dream of becoming a doctor. Now I live in a great city, and I'm truly happy." His name was Ricardo Paniagua, but he simply went by Rick. Born in 1977 in California, Rick came from a poor background, but had risen above it all, eventually becoming a successful dermatologist after graduating from Stanford Medical School. With his sharp looks and polished demeanor, Rick made a strong first impression on just about everyone he met. He had moved to Dallas in 2011, following the end of a nearly 3-year relationship. Perhaps it was the shared background in medicine, or perhaps it was simply fate, but Kendra quickly felt a connection with Rick. After only a few days of chatting, they decided to meet on May 24th. Their first conversation flowed effortlessly, as if they'd known each other forever. Within just 2 weeks, Kendra made their relationship public on Instagram, posting sweet and romantic photos of the two. By August, they were vacationing together and even talking seriously about buying a house and getting married. They had big plans. On September 3, 2015, they were scheduled to fly to Cancun for a getaway, and afterward, visit Kendra's parents in Illinois to discuss wedding plans. She was beaming with happiness, so much so that even during yoga class she couldn't help but smile. But everything ended in tragedy. On the evening of September 2, 2015, around 7 p.m., Kendra left work and drove home. She was excited, her mind filled with thoughts of white sands and future dreams. As she pulled into the parking garage beneath her building, she had no idea someone was waiting in the shadows. Just as she stepped out of her car, a dark figure emerged behind her. A single gunshot rang out. Kendra collapsed, lifeless, into a pool of blood. A neighbor heard the shot and immediately called 911. When police arrived, Kendra was already gunshot in the back of the head. With no eyewitnesses and no immediate suspects, the investigation proved to be challenging. The sudden, brutal nature of the crime sent shockwaves through the entire apartment complex and all of uptown Dallas. This was supposed to be one of the safest areas in the city, a place where many single women chose to live for peace of mind. But now, after a cold-blooded murder in the parking garage, fear had taken hold. Police immediately launched an investigation, and the first person they turned to was Rick, Kendra's boyfriend. In homicide cases, the romantic partner is often the first suspect. But Rick and Kendra had been happy together, planning a future and a wedding. More importantly, Rick had a solid alibi. When he learned that Kendra had been murdered, Rick was devastated. He insisted that she was a kind, gentle person who didn't have enemies. Her friends echoed the same sentiment. Everyone who knew Kendra loved her. If it wasn't a crime driven by hatred, could it have been a robbery gone wrong? At the scene, police noted that Kendra's purse, camera, and several other belongings were missing. Then came a crucial discovery. Security cameras in the parking garage captured footage of a black Jeep arriving just before Kendra pulled in. Moments after she parked, a man stepped out of the Jeep and followed her. About 40 seconds later, he returned to the vehicle, got into the back seat, and the Jeep quickly drove off. Although the camera didn't capture the exact moment of the shooting, the timing and the man's movements led police to believe this wasn't a random act of violence, it was a planned assassination. The Jeep Grand Cherokee seen in the footage had two occupants, one behind the wheel, the other carrying out the attack. Due to the poor video quality, the police couldn't get a clear view of the driver's face or the license plate. However, they could tell the driver was a woman and that the vehicle was definitely a Jeep Grand Cherokee. Hoping for a lead, the police released the video to the public, asking anyone who recognized the car to come forward. It didn't take long. A man named Jose, who owned a local auto repair shop, contacted the police. He was certain the Jeep in the video belonged to him, easy to identify thanks to its custom rims. And more importantly, on September 2nd, he had lent the car to someone. That person was Brenda Delgado, Rick's ex-girlfriend. Her full name was Brenda Delgado. She was born in 1982 into a poor family in Mexico. Her parents had 5 children in total, and Brenda was the second child and the only daughter. Hoping for a better life, her family eventually immigrated to Dallas, Texas. Though they could only afford to live in Pleasant Grove, a low-income area in southeastern Dallas, to them, the city still held promise. Dallas was their land of opportunity, the place where they pinned their hopes for a brighter future. Brenda's parents didn't have much of an education. Her father worked in construction, while her mother cleaned offices at a post office. Life was a constant struggle. Seeing their hardships, Brenda grew up with a burning desire to escape poverty and build a better life not just for herself, but for her entire family. Despite being a good student, she couldn't afford college. Instead, she took a job as a dental assistant, eventually moving on to work at a teeth whitening spa. Her income was modest, but Brenda still liked to spend time at upscale bars and shopping centers in uptown Dallas, trying to fit into the world she dreamed of belonging to. In August 2012, Brenda met Rick through a dating app. At the time, Rick was already a successful dermatologist and an assistant professor at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. After a few dates, he became captivated by Brenda's confidence and ambition. They soon made their relationship official. Just 3 months later, Brenda moved in with Rick, She saw him as the perfect man, the one who could give her the dream life she had always imagined. But that dream didn't last. For nearly 2 years, their relationship seemed stable. In 2013, Brenda became pregnant with Rick's child. After much discussion, the two agreed not to keep the baby. The decision devastated Brenda. By July 2014, cracks began to show. Rick asked for a breakup, though the exact reason wasn't clear. Brenda was crushed. She tried desperately to win him back, hoping to salvage the relationship. And for a while, it worked. They reconciled. But in February 2015, they broke up again. This time, it was final, both of them knew it. Still, they stayed in touch, occasionally texting. According to Rick, their relationship had evolved into a simple friendship, without bitterness or resentment. Then, in May 2015, Rick met Kendra and began a new romance. As we know, just 3 months later, Kendra was shot dead. Was Brenda driven by jealousy toward the woman who had taken Rick from her? Had she killed Kendra out of revenge? Police didn't waste any time. They brought Brenda in for questioning. When questioned by the police, Brenda remained remarkably calm. She was fully cooperative, spoke clearly, and showed no signs of anxiety or fear. In fact, she even tried to build a friendly rapport with the investigators. Typically, even innocent people feel some level of nervousness when brought into a police station, but Brenda's demeanor was different. That unsettling composure only made her seem more suspicious. However, during the interrogation, police discovered that Brenda had a seemingly solid alibi. On September the 2nd, from noon until 6 p.m., she was studying at a library with some friends. Later that evening, she had dinner at a restaurant with a receipt timestamped at 8:57 p.m., almost exactly when the murder occurred. But one fact remained undeniable. Brenda had borrowed the black Jeep from Jose. When asked about this, Brenda claimed that she had loaned the vehicle to a friend named Christopher. As for what Christopher did with the car, Brenda said she had no idea. Police immediately brought Christopher in for questioning. Like Brenda, she was smooth-talking and seemed oddly relaxed in the interview room. She told investigators that, on that day, a masked man had held a gun to her back and forced her to drive. She claimed not to know anything about the shooting, insisting that the attacker was fully masked and she couldn't identify him. But Christopher's story quickly fell apart. In the security footage, after the man exited the Jeep, Christopher remained seated calmly in the driver's seat, waiting without any sign of distress. If she had truly been threatened at gunpoint, she would have shown panic or tried to flee. She didn't. Realizing she'd been caught in a lie, Christopher changed her story. This time, she said she had simply driven to the parking garage to meet a friend. The man was just catching a ride, and she had no knowledge of what he was doing there. But when pressed to identify this so-called friend or the man in question, she couldn't give a name, couldn't offer a single detail. Finally, Christopher revised her statement once more. This time, she confessed that Brenda had paid her $500 to drive to the parking garage. According to her, the plan was to rob Kendra, take her wallet and ID. She claimed she was unemployed at the time and needed the money, so she agreed to help. Since Christopher was the one driving the Jeep directly involved in the crime, police decided to detain her pending further investigation. But what about Brenda? The police grew increasingly convinced that Brenda was deeply involved in the crime, so they decided to ramp up their interrogation tactics. During the next round of questioning, they deliberately provoked her with sharp personal remarks like, "You were jealous of Kendra, weren't you? She was prettier. Then you had a better life, and she took Rick away from you." But Brenda's unsettling composure didn't crack. She calmly insisted that her breakup with Rick had been peaceful and that she had no reason to harm Kendra. When the detectives began pressing harder, Brenda cut them off coldly. "I don't want to answer any more questions," she said. "If you keep pushing, I'll call my lawyer." Although the detectives strongly suspected her involvement, they didn't yet have enough evidence to press charges. Reluctantly, they released her, but placed her under restriction, not allowed to leave Dallas. However, almost immediately after walking out of the police station, Brenda fled the country and vanished into Mexico. With Brenda gone, the police shifted their focus to tracking down the shooter. Using phone records and Christopher's testimony, they identified the suspect, Robert Love. Love, 31, had a long rap sheet everything from theft and assault to illegal weapons possession. At the time, he was homeless, drifting from place to place, earning money by selling marijuana. When detectives reviewed his criminal history, they knew they were on the right track. During his interrogation, Love denied everything. He claimed he didn't know Christopher or Brenda and insisted he had an alibi. But no matter what he said, he couldn't talk his way out of the mounting evidence. When police searched his vehicle, they found a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson pistol hidden beneath the center console. Ballistic testing later confirmed it was the murder weapon used to kill Kendra. On top of that, call records showed that from August 1st to September 3rd, there had been 226 calls exchanged between Brenda, Christopher, and Love. On the day of the murder, the locations of their cell phones all matched the crime scene. These findings made it clear Brenda wasn't just connected to the case, she was a central figure in a premeditated plot. But even with all this evidence, the fact remained she had an airtight alibi and no direct eyewitness placed her at the scene. That meant the police still couldn't arrest her. Not yet. Faced with the situation, the prosecutor decided to strike a deal with Christopher. If she confessed to everything and agreed to testify, she would receive a 35-year prison sentence instead of the death penalty. Knowing there was no way out, Christopher immediately pleaded guilty and told the whole story. She revealed that Brenda was the mastermind behind it all. At the time, I was broke. My son was only 6 years old, and my mother was seriously ill. Brenda approached me and said she wanted to get rid of Kendra. She offered me $500. I agreed because I needed the money. Then I brought Love into it. Brenda promised him cash and weed. On September 2nd, we followed Kendra. I drove, and Love was the one who pulled the trigger. After it was done, Brenda paid me $500. I still have a photo of the money on my phone. With this testimony, everything became clear. Brenda was the true mastermind. When Rick heard the news, he couldn't believe it. To him, Brenda had always seemed kind and gentle. Even after they broke up, they stayed in touch. And after Kendra's death, Brenda had appeared caring, even comforting Rick through his grief. Brenda's family was equally stunned. Her mother insisted the police had the wrong person. She described her daughter as a kind woman and a devout Catholic. She simply couldn't accept that Brenda could commit such a cruel act. But the truth was undeniable. Police issued a warrant for Brenda's arrest, but she had already fled to Mexico. Because U.S. warrants aren't valid there, American authorities faced major obstacles in bringing her to justice. In 2016, the FBI added Brenda to the 10 most wanted fugitives list and offered a $100,000 reward for information leading to her capture. They also warned that she was dangerous and capable of manipulating those around her. However, once someone makes it onto that list, escape becomes nearly impossible. And as expected, Brenda couldn't hide for long. With the help of Mexican authorities, she was tracked down in the city of Torreon. By April 2016, realizing her options had run out, Brenda turned herself in. But then, another complication arose. Although the United States and Mexico have an extradition treaty, the Mexican authorities initially refused to hand over Brenda. They were concerned that if she were returned to the U.S., she might face the death penalty. To break the deadlock, the U.S. government had to formally guarantee that even if Brenda were convicted, the harshest sentence she would face would be life imprisonment. Only after receiving this assurance did Mexico agree to extradite her back to Dallas for trial. In October 2018, the trial of Robert Love began. With Christopher's testimony and the murder weapon as evidence, the jury took just 2 hours to unanimously find him guilty. Love was sentenced to death. Christopher, having signed a plea deal, did not have to stand trial. She received a 35-year prison sentence with no possibility of parole for the first 15 years. By May 2019, it was Brenda's turn to face trial. In court, she remained cold and emotionless. She didn't look at Kendra's family, and she showed no sign of remorse. But with overwhelming evidence against her, the jury took only 20 minutes to reach a verdict: guilty. Initially, she could have faced the death penalty, but due to the prior agreement with Mexico, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At the trial, Kendra's sister broke down in tears. If you ever met her, The thing you'd probably remember most is her laugh.
Khi nghe tin
Kendra was
cô bị
always
sát
full of
hại,
love and
tôi đã
always
không thể
willing to
tin
help
nổi.
others. When I heard
Không
she'd
ai ghét
been
cô ấy
murdered,
cả.
I couldn't believe it. Nobody hated her. Nobody would ever want to hurt her. After Love was sentenced to death, surprisingly, some people began advocating for him. A petition was launched demanding his release, arguing that the gun found in the vehicle wasn't proven to be the murder weapon, and there were no fingerprints or DNA linking him to it. They claimed he was convicted not on the basis of evidence, but because of racial bias. However, the petition only gathered 803 signatures, and the prosecutor's office did not respond. Looking back on the case, Brenda had a difficult childhood but always seemed to strive forward. To outsiders, she was seen as a kind, religious young woman with a promising future. But when faced with the torment of losing her love, she chose the path of brutal revenge. When love turns into obsession, when heartbreak festers into hatred, even the most polite, gentle person can harbor the darkest thoughts. And in the end, an innocent woman completely unaware of this hidden resentment became the victim of that madness. It's tragic and heartbreaking. This story serves as a painful reminder that love, while it can be the most powerful motivator, can also become the most dangerous obsession. When someone cannot accept loss, they may lose their sense of reason, willing to commit the cruelest acts just to hold on or to strike back. That's why, when love ends, we must learn to let go. Because sometimes the best thing you can do isn't to hold on, but to give yourself and the other person a chance to move on. The main character in today's story is a beautiful woman whose life was tragically short. She was found completely naked, with her hands bound behind her back, hanging from a rope over the balcony of a luxurious mansion. Her death was so bizarre it looked like something straight out of a horror movie. But what truly shocked the public was the police's conclusion. This wasn't murder, it was suicide. That verdict immediately sparked a wave of controversy. A renowned forensic pathologist with 56 years of experience stated he had never seen a case this strange, and he strongly doubted the police's ruling. The story begins at the Spreckles Mansion, located in the town of Coronado, California. The REE estate, valued at $17 million, was originally built in 1908 by a wealthy businessman named John Spreckles. Spanning over 11,000 square feet and featuring 27 rooms, the mansion's current owner is Jonah Shacknai, CEO of the pharmaceutical company Medikis, who earned $6.4 million in 2010. On the early morning of July 13, 2011, as sunlight first touched the island of Coronado, a horrifying sight appeared just outside the mansion. Rebecca, Jonah Shacknai's girlfriend, was discovered hanging from the balcony. Adam Shacknai, Jonah's younger brother, was the one who found her. He had gotten up to make coffee, glanced outside, and froze. Rebecca was suspended in midair. Adam immediately called 911. While waiting for help to arrive, he grabbed a kitchen knife, cut the rope, lowered Rebecca to the ground, and attempted CPR. But it was already too late. When the paramedics arrived, Rebecca showed no signs of life. The crime scene was eerie. Rebecca was naked, with 4 large injuries on the right side of her head. Both of her hands were tied behind her back with a red rope. Her legs were also bound, and remnants of duct tape were still visible. Around her neck, a blue t-shirt had been tightly wrapped. The sleeves of the shirt were knotted and stuffed into her mouth. The rope she had been hanging from still dangled from the balcony, its other end secured to the base of a bed in the bedroom. Inside that bedroom, police found 2 knives, a towel, and 4 small bloodstains. On the handle of one of the knives, traces of menstrual blood were detected. Most disturbingly, scrawled in black paint on the bedroom door were the words, "He saved her." Was this really a suicide? Or was there something far more sinister being covered up? Before we dive into the deeper mysteries of the case, let's get to know Rebecca, the woman at the heart of this tragic story. Rebecca was born on March 15, 1979, in Myanmar, into an aristocratic family. She was one of 7 siblings. Due to political unrest, her family was forced to flee their homeland. They spent about a decade living in Nepal and Germany before finally settling in Austria. While attending a religious university in Austria, Rebecca met Neil, an American man nearly 10 years her senior. The two got engaged, and Rebecca followed her fiancé to the United States. Everything seemed to be going well until October 2009, when Rebecca met a visitor at work. It was supposed to be just a routine eye exam, but this man was immediately captivated by her radiant appearance and warm personality. That man was Jonah Shaknai, a well-known figure in the pharmaceutical world. His career journey was impressive. A law school graduate, a former writer, and eventually the CEO of a major pharmaceutical company with numerous patents and awards in the medical field under his name. Rebecca and Jonah quickly realized they had a lot in common. They shared a passion for sports, a love for the outdoors, and an appreciation for good food. The more she got to know him, the more she was drawn into his world. But Jonah, by 2010, was 52 years old and had already been through 2 marriages. He had 2 teenage children from his first wife. Then, in 2005, he had a son named Max with his second wife. That marriage also ended in divorce in 2008. During her relationship with Jonah, Rebecca seemed to lose sight of the fact that she was still legally married. It wasn't until March 2011 that she officially divorced Neil. After 2 years of dating, both she and Jonah felt it was time to take the relationship to the next level. By the end of 2010, Rebecca decided to quit her job and fully dedicate herself to caring for Jonah's 3 children, but being a stepmother was far from easy. Jonah's 2 older kids showed no respect for her, especially his daughter, Gabby, who made no effort to hide her disdain. The only one who seemed close to Rebecca was 6-year-old Max, who adored her and followed her everywhere. It wasn't just the kids that made things hard. Rebecca was also never accepted by the women from Jonah's past. Most notably, Dina, Max's mother, constantly gave her a hard time, blaming her for just about everything. The pressure kept building, and Rebecca gradually began to feel like nothing more than a glorified nanny dressed in luxury, but with no real place in this family. And still, that wasn't the worst of it. On May 30th, 2011, Jonah and Rebecca brought the kids to the Spreckles mansion for summer vacation. On July 10th, Rebecca's younger sister, Zena, flew in to visit and planned to stay for 2 weeks. But just 1 day later, on the morning of July 11th, an unthinkable tragedy occurred. That morning, Jonah had left the house to go work out at a nearby gym. Inside the mansion were Rebecca, her sister Zena, and Max. Around 10 a.m., Rebecca was in the bathroom when she heard a loud crash from outside. Alarmed, she rushed out to check and froze at the sight before her. Max was lying motionless on the first floor. Beside him was his scooter. Above him, a massive crystal chandelier had shattered, raining glass across the floor. Max, barely conscious, whispered one final word: the name of the family dog, Ocean. Then, he slipped into unconsciousness. Panicked, Rebecca screamed for her sister upstairs. Zena, who had been in the shower, quickly threw on clothes and rushed down as Rebecca began performing CPR. Hearing her sister's terrified cries, Zena called 911. Just minutes later, the ambulance arrived, but by then, Max had already fallen into a deep coma. One of the first officers on the scene later recalled that in her panic, Rebecca turned to her sister and said, "It's over. Dina is going to kill me." At that moment, Jonah was still at the gym. At exactly 10:24 a.m., he received a call from Rebecca, but all he could hear was screaming and chaotic noise on the other end. Sensing that something was terribly wrong, Jonah rushed home immediately. When he arrived, police cars and an ambulance were already parked outside the mansion. Max was lying motionless on the floor, about to be rushed to the hospital. Jonah was devastated. He jumped into the ambulance with his son and accompanied him to the children's hospital. There, Max had stopped breathing. But thanks to emergency resuscitation, the doctors were able to restart his heart. They later confirmed that Max's survival was only possible because he had received CPR in time. The diagnosis, however, was grim. Max had suffered a severe brain injury, facial fractures, and significant trauma to his spinal cord. Doctors decided to place him in a medically induced coma to reduce the stress on his body and buy time in the hope of saving his life. Dina, Max's mother, rushed to the hospital. When she saw her beloved son lying still on the hospital bed, his small face covered in medical devices, she broke down completely. She didn't yet know what had happened. But when Jonah spoke to her, he said, "You should be on your knees thanking Rebecca. She saved Max's life." At first, Dina didn't think much of it, but later, while speaking with the doctors, she learned that Jonah hadn't even been home at the time of Max's accident. That detail planted the first seeds of doubt in her mind. To avoid upsetting Dina further, Jonah asked Rebecca not to come to the hospital and instead stay at the mansion to handle things at home. Rebecca agreed. One of her first tasks was to take the family dog, Ocean, to a pet boarding service. That afternoon, Dina's twin sister arrived from San Francisco with her son. Rebecca picked them up from the airport. On the drive back, they talked briefly about Max's accident, but Rebecca avoided going into detail. Her distant behavior made Dina's sister feel like something wasn't quite right. The following afternoon, Rebecca took her sister Zena to the airport for her return flight to Missouri. Afterward, she went to pick up Adam, Jonah's younger brother, from the airport. Adam would soon become a key figure in this case. In 2011, Adam was 42 years old. He had graduated from the University of Memphis, but chose a very different life path. He worked on the river first as a tugboat crewman, then eventually as a captain. Normally, Adam lived in a modest apartment in Memphis and had a girlfriend. His life was a world apart from Jonah's, but that never seemed to affect the bond between the two brothers. That night, Jonah, Rebecca, Adam, and a few others went out for dinner. After the meal, Jonah returned to the hospital to be with his son, while Rebecca and Adam headed back to the mansion. Adam stayed in the guest house, an independent structure located behind the main house, forming an L shape around the property. Rebecca had had an exhausting day. Back in her room, she called her sister Mary. The call lasted 27 minutes, during which Rebecca recounted everything that had happened over the past 2 days. She also mentioned her plans to visit their parents during the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday. After that call, the two sisters spoke on the phone twice more, followed by a series of text messages. After that, Rebecca got ready to take a shower and go to bed. She had to wake up at 5 a.m. the next morning to make breakfast for Jonah and bring him clean clothes at the hospital. The last message she sent to her sister read, "I have to be strong for Jonah." Up to this point, although Dina Max's mother had expressed some frustration toward Rebecca for not watching her son more carefully, her focus remained firmly on Max's condition, clinging to hope for his recovery. There had been no major conflicts between the two women. No one could have predicted that just 4 days later, Max would pass away. And even more unimaginable before that could happen, Rebecca's body would be found at the mansion. On the morning of July 13th, Adam was the one who discovered the body. After calling 911, he immediately phoned Jonah to deliver the news. Jonah later said he was in complete shock. He quickly called Dinah and told her what had happened. Upon hearing the news, Dinah's first question was, "How did she die?" Jonah didn't answer directly. Instead, he made a gesture as if stabbing himself in the stomach and said one phrase, "Asian honor." Dina assumed he was referring to seppuku, the Japanese ritual suicide performed as an act of atonement. But the nightmare wasn't over. 3 days later, on July 16th, Max succumbed to his injuries. Within the span of just 1 week, 2 deaths had occurred in the same family. The incident quickly drew massive public attention. Jonah's pharmaceutical company took a major hit, with its stock prices plunging. Within 2 months, the case was covered by nearly every major media outlet. Given the strange nature of the scene, police initially suspected foul play. They began asking a long list of questions about Rebecca's death. Her bedroom felt shrouded in mystery. On the balcony, in addition to Rebecca's footprints, officers discovered a man's footprints. On a bookshelf, they found a copy of Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft. One of its pages described how to bind a nude woman's hands behind her back. Strangely, the instructions called for a red rope measuring exactly 9 feet, matching both the length and color of the rope found at the scene. But perhaps the most unsettling discovery was a message scrawled on the bedroom door. "He saved her." It looked hastily written, the handwriting erratic and uneven. Then, a neighbor who lived 2 houses down from the mansion came forward with a chilling statement. He told police that on the night of the incident, he had heard a woman's terrified scream followed by cries for help coming from the direction of the mansion. With this new lead, the investigation shifted focus to Adam. Based on the circumstances, only 2 people had been in the mansion that night, Rebecca and Adam. Rebecca's hands had been bound using a specific knot, a type of nautical hitch commonly known as a mariner's knot. This is a technique frequently used aboard boats. Notably, Adam was a tugboat captain, a job requiring expertise in tying such knots. In an effort to clear his name, Adam agreed to take a polygraph test. However, the results were inconclusive, offering no clear indication of whether he was telling the truth or lying. Jonah, for his part, remained adamant that his brother was a good man who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. He insisted that Adam and Rebecca had a cordial relationship and couldn't believe his brother would ever harm her. But what about Dina? Tensions between her and Rebecca had existed for quite some time, and detectives remembered that on the morning Max fell, Rebecca had said something haunting to her sister. "It's over. Dina is going to kill me." But were those suspicions justified? At exactly 10:48 p.m. on the night of the incident, Rebecca received a text message from Nina, Dina's twin sister. The message asked if Rebecca could come outside for a talk about Max's accident. However, it was clear that Nina's intent wasn't simply to talk, it was to confront Rebecca, likely to hold her accountable for what had happened. Rebecca never responded to the message. According to a witness, that night, a woman was seen lingering outside the mansion around midnight. She had long dark hair, weighed over 180 pounds, and bore a strong resemblance to Dina. Despite this, after more than a month of investigation, on September 2, 2011, the San Diego sheriff held a press conference and officially declared Rebecca's death a suicide. The stated reason: she had been overwhelmed with grief and guilt over Max's accident. These were the key pieces of evidence the police presented to support their conclusion. First, only Rebecca's fingerprints were found at the scene on the door, the knife, and the balcony railing. Second, Rebecca's DNA was found on the ropes and at the corner of the bed where the rope had been secured. No other DNA was found on any of these critical items. Third, the male footprint discovered on the balcony was determined to belong to a police officer who had accidentally contaminated the scene during the investigation. Fourth, the witchcraft book discovered in the room only had Rebecca's fingerprints on it. Investigators reasoned that if someone had staged the scene to resemble an occult ritual, they likely wouldn't have left the book hidden in an obscure spot on the shelf. Fifth, a tube of black paint was found near the scene, and only Rebecca's fingerprints were on its cap. The painted message on the bedroom door, "He saved her," was later analyzed and did not match Adam's handwriting. Furthermore, there were no signs of struggle or forced restraint. If Rebecca had been bound and dragged to the balcony by someone else, it was hard to imagine she would have shown no resistance whatsoever. On the night of Rebecca's death, a pediatric doctor named Dr. Peterson had met with Jonah and Dina at the hospital. He was direct and honest. Max's condition was critical, and it was highly likely the boy wouldn't survive. Even if he did, he would be paralyzed for life. Then, the doctor pointed out a disturbing detail. Max's injuries suggested he may have been suffocated before falling down the stairs. Shortly after this devastating news, at 12:30 a.m. on July 13th, Jonah called Rebecca. She didn't pick up. He left her a voicemail. About 20 minutes later, Rebecca listened to the message, then immediately deleted it. No one knows exactly what the message said. Jonah claimed he had simply informed Rebecca about Max's grave condition. Police theorized that upon hearing the tragic update, Rebecca was overcome by despair and decided to take her own life. But that still left one haunting question. How could her hands have been tied behind her back? The police believed that some people, when committing suicide, fear they might hesitate or regret their decision at the last minute. So they tie their hands to prevent themselves from backing out. To support this theory, they enlisted a female officer with a similar build to Rebecca to recreate the act of self-binding. As for the head injuries on Rebecca, investigators claimed that after she fell from the balcony, her body swung like a pendulum, causing her head to strike the railing multiple times, resulting in the wounds found on the right side of her skull. But Rebecca's family refused to accept that explanation. Her sister, Mary, insisted she knew Rebecca well. Rebecca had always been cheerful, confident, energetic, and full of life. Though she had been sad about Max's accident, there were no signs based on their conversations that she was falling apart. In fact, Rebecca had told her she needed to be strong for Jonah, and had even mentioned plans to visit their parents for Thanksgiving. On top of that, Rebecca was raised in a devout Christian household, attended a religious university, and firmly believed that those who took their own lives would be cursed. There was also the issue of her personal pride. Rebecca cared deeply about her image. So why would she choose such a humiliating way to end her life, especially during her menstrual period? Her personal trainer confirmed that Rebecca was always upbeat and showed no signs of being suicidal. The media, too, began to question the police's conclusion. The lawyer representing Rebecca's family went as far as to mock the ruling, saying that if this was suicide, then it was likely the strangest suicide in history, something completely irrational. Forensic pathologist Jonathan, who performed a second autopsy, declared that in his 56 years of practice, he had never encountered a case this bizarre. He stated flatly, "No woman would ever commit suicide in such a horrific way." The family then hired another high-profile forensic expert, Dr. Cyril Wecht. Wecht made several crucial observations. If Rebecca had truly hanged herself by flipping over the balcony, the force of the rope should have been strong enough to fracture her windpipe or even her cervical vertebrae. But her neck showed no such trauma, suggesting she may have been strangled to death before being lowered over the edge. He conducted experiments using a model with the same weight as Rebecca. The results showed that a body of that weight would have caused the bed where the rope was tied to be dragged forward about 50 centimeters. But at the scene, the bed had only moved 18 centimeters, far too little to support the suicide theory. Additionally, in typical hanging deaths, blood tends to pool in the lower extremities, leading to bruising in the legs. But in Rebecca's case, the bruising was concentrated on her back, suggesting she may have died while lying on the floor, not while suspended. And perhaps the most troubling question of all, if Rebecca had truly planned to end her life, why didn't she leave a farewell letter to her loved ones? Why instead scribble a cryptic and messy phrase on the door? In Rebecca's bedroom, there were 2 knives. One of them had her fingerprints on it, but the other had no prints at all. If she had used it, how could it possibly be free of any trace of her? A series of unresolved mysteries led Rebecca's family to file a lawsuit. They named Adam Jonah's younger brother, Dina Jonah's ex-wife, and Dina's twin sister, Nina, as the defendants, accusing them of conspiring to murder Rebecca. Rebecca's family filed a lawsuit with charges including armed kidnapping, aggravated assault, and murder, demanding more than $30 million in damages. However, during the investigation, the police confirmed that Dina had been at the hospital all night to watch over her son, while her twin sister, Nina, had been at a hotel far from the villa and never came near it during the time of the incident. Witness statements about a woman loitering outside the villa that night did not match the appearance of either of Dina's sisters. Dina had blonde hair, not very long, and weighed about 125 pounds, around 57 kilos, while the witness described the woman as having dark hair and weighing about 180 pounds, over 80 kilos. Additionally, it was peak tourist season, and there were many visitors passing by the villa, so anyone could have been the one seen outside that night. After confirming the alibis of both Dina sisters, Rebecca's family's attorney removed their names from the list of defendants and held a public press conference to apologize. In the years that followed, Dina's actions did not align with someone seeking revenge for her son's death. Instead of trying to get back at anyone, she spent a significant amount of money hiring top investigators and forensic experts to uncover the truth behind Max's death. If Dina truly believed that Rebecca had caused her son's death, she probably wouldn't have done that. On July 26, 2011, the San Diego police ruled Max's death as an accident. The police concluded that Max had been riding his scooter too fast on the second floor, lost control, and crashed through the railing. In an attempt to grab onto something, he accidentally caught the chandelier, causing it to fall, and Max plummeted from the second floor to the ground below, hitting his face and breaking his neck. However, Dina didn't believe her son could have had an accident in such a way. She hired 2 forensic experts and a private investigation firm to re-examine the scene. The two forensic experts came to the same conclusion. Max had facial and neck injuries and died from asphyxiation after falling. But the findings of the private investigation firm made people reconsider the entire case. Their discoveries included: the second floor of the villa had thick carpeting, so the scooter couldn't have been going fast enough to cause Max to crash through the railing. The railing was 82 centimeters high, while Max was 114.3 centimeters tall. This meant the railing was higher than his chest, and it would have been nearly impossible for him to fall over without external force. The scooter had handlebars and one foot always on the ground to propel it. With this setup, it would have been very difficult for Max to be pulled off the railing along with the scooter. If Max had truly tried to grab the chandelier when falling, he would have had injuries on his hands. But in reality, there were no injuries on his hands. Rebecca had said that when she found Max on the floor, she heard him calling for the family dog, Ocean. However, the two forensic experts firmly stated that with the force exerted on his face and neck, Max should have lost the ability to speak immediately. This meant that he couldn't have said Ocean as Rebecca described. So why did Rebecca add that detail? Could it be that she feared Jonah would blame her for not taking better care of Max, so she intentionally mentioned the dog to distract from the situation? Or worse, was Rebecca trying to hide something related to Max's fall? In 2018, during an interview with the media, Dina proposed another theory. She no longer believed that Rebecca was the one who killed her son. Instead, she thought it was possible that an intruder had snuck into the villa and caused the incident. After Rebecca's death, Jonah hired 2 armed bodyguards to protect him 24/7. He claimed it was just to avoid media harassment, but no one believed that. Could it be that Jonah truly didn't know what had happened and feared that he would be the next target? He had even written a letter to the prosecutor's office, requesting that the investigation into Rebecca and Max's deaths be reopened, but this request was denied. After dropping the lawsuit against Dina and Nina, Rebecca's family was left with only one defendant, Adam Shacknai. However, they changed their accusations, no longer charging Adam with murder out of hatred, but rather with sexual assault. The plaintiff argued that Adam had tried to sexually assault Rebecca. As she resisted and screamed, he had used a hard, smooth object to strike the right side of her head, rendering her unable to fight back. Afterward, Adam allegedly staged the scene to make her death look like a suicide. The plaintiff's lawyer pointed out that the knife at the scene had Rebecca's menstrual fluid on it and claimed that Adam had used the knife to assault her. However, the police firmly rejected this theory. According to them, the autopsy showed no signs of sexual assault. During the trial, Adam testified, saying that while Rebecca was indeed beautiful and alluring, she was his brother's girlfriend, and he had never had any ill intentions toward her. Rebecca's family then filed a lawsuit against Adam for causing death through negligence and demanded $10 million in damages. This was a civil case, not a criminal one, so if Adam were found guilty, he would not go to jail, but would only face a fine. In April 2018, despite no physical evidence linking Adam to the crime, the jury still voted 9-3 to convict Adam and ordered him to pay $5 million to Rebecca's family and $167,000 for the amount Rebecca would have provided for her parents and siblings. Rebecca's family then declared that they didn't care about the money. They only wanted to force the police to reopen the investigation. But unexpectedly, in February 2019, Rebecca's family suddenly reached a settlement with Adam. According to the terms, Adam's insurance paid Rebecca's family $600,000, and the case officially closed. In a world filled with stories of crime and justice, today, let's dive into a case full of drama where nothing is quite as it seems. It was a horrifying night. Ohio, located in the Midwest of the United States, has a population of nearly 11.8 million people, making it the 7th most populous state in the country. Known for its abundance of maple trees, it's often called the Buckeye State. Politically, Ohio holds a special place in American history. 7 U.S. presidents were born there. At around 5:30 a.m. on July 31st, 2022, in Strongsville, a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, a loud crash shattered the stillness of the early morning. A black Toyota Camry, speeding far above the limit, slammed straight into the Pride Company building. The car was almost completely crushed. About 45 minutes later, a passerby noticed the wreckage and immediately called the police. Police officers, firefighters, and paramedics rushed to the scene. The crash site was chaotic. The vehicle was completely destroyed. Inside were 3 young individuals, all unconscious. The driver was a beautiful young woman, injured in her arms and legs, her body trapped under the dashboard. In the front passenger seat sat a young man, his head badly injured, blood covering his face. Another young man was in the back seat, severely, wounded in the abdomen and thighs. As the rescue team worked to free the victims from the mangled vehicle, the sight of the wreckage filled them with sorrow. It seemed impossible that anyone could have survived, but to their surprise, when they removed the airbags, they discovered the young female driver was still breathing barely, but alive. She was rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment. Unfortunately, the 2 young men didn't make it. They were pronounced dead at the scene. It didn't take long to identify the 3, 17-year-old Mackenzie Sharilla, 20-year-old Dominic Russo, and 19-year-old Davion Flanagan. They weren't just close friends, they were well known at their school. Mackenzie, born on August 2, 2004 in Strongsville, was known for her beauty and charm. Since childhood, she'd been adored by friends and classmates. In high school, she was often the object of admiration and confessions from boys. She was the dream girl of many. Dominic Russo, her boyfriend, was energetic, fun-loving, and passionate about basketball. He had a strong sense of fashion and often designed stylish outfits for his girlfriend. At the time of the accident, he was planning to launch his own clothing brand. The couple had met at school and had been in a relationship for over 4 years. Since the end of 2021, they had been living together at Russo's house. His mother adored Mackenzie and even prepared an apartment for their future together. Davion was Dominic's close friend. He was considered smart, handsome, and athletic. He played both volleyball and football and had been a key player on the school football team. The kind of guy people looked up to. He even ran a barber shop and had formed a professional hairstyling team. All 3 of these young people were talented, admired, and full of potential. They had bright futures ahead of them. No one could have imagined that, in a single night, all of it would be gone. But what really happened? After receiving emergency treatment, Mackenzie was temporarily out of danger. Later, a mutual friend named Paul gave a statement to the police. He said that around 11 p.m. on July 30th, the 3 had come over to his house for a party. They listened to music, watched TV, ate, and smoked marijuana. Paul, feeling tired, fell asleep. Around 4:45 a.m., the trio left his house. None of them could have known that a tragedy was waiting just down the road. In the wreckage, police found 8.1 grams of illegal substances and some marijuana. Forensic tests confirmed the presence of cannabis in both Russo's and Davion's systems. Drugs were also found in Mackenzie's shirt pocket. All signs pointed to one thing. The group had been using drugs before the crash occurred. The crash site was located at the intersection of Progress Drive and Alameda Drive. Progress Drive had long been paved in concrete, but over time it had deteriorated, with dangerous curves that even experienced drivers had to approach with caution. The speed limit in that area was 35 miles per hour, but the sign was placed in a hidden spot, hard to notice. Speeding in that stretch carried a serious risk of losing control. At first, investigators believed this was a tragic accident that happened in the early hours of the morning. Given that Mackenzie had been under the influence, it seemed likely she had not been fully conscious or aware and may have lost control of the vehicle due to excessive speed. All signs pointed to this, being an unfortunate accident. But things quickly took a strange turn. When police reviewed surveillance footage from nearby businesses and traffic cameras, something stood out. At first, the car wasn't speeding. In fact, as it approached a curve, it actually slowed down. But immediately after making the turn, the vehicle suddenly accelerated fast and aggressively right in the direction of the building. It was highly unusual. At the same time, forensic crash analysts examining the car's onboard data recorder uncovered a series of disturbing details. In the final moments before impact, the vehicle showed continuous acceleration. The gas pedal had been pushed down all the way for 4.6 seconds before the crash. In those few seconds, the car's speed surged to 97 miles per hour without the brakes ever being applied. The police contacted Toyota to investigate whether the vehicle might have malfunctioned. Toyota confirmed the car had received regular maintenance and showed no issues. Technicians tested the braking and acceleration systems, along with the gas pedal and other controls. Everything was functioning properly. There was no indication of a mechanical failure or unintended acceleration. So the question arose, why did Mackenzie floor the accelerator without ever touching the brakes? Even more troubling, just before the crash, the steering wheel turned slightly to the left, then suddenly jerked hard to the right, rotating 142 degrees. That sharp turn caused the vehicle to spin out of control and slam into the building. And in the final 4.7 seconds before impact, the car's gear shifted rapidly between park and drive. These clues transformed what once looked like a routine accident into something far more suspicious. It no longer appeared to be a simple traffic incident, it was beginning to resemble a meticulously planned act. To get closer to the truth, police visited Mackenzie in the hospital to ask about the crash, but she said she remembered nothing. The entire event was a blank. When she was told that her two friends had died, she broke down completely, crying uncontrollably. Psychologists suggested this could be a symptom of post-traumatic stress. When people experience intense emotional or physical shock, the brain may block out painful memories as a form of self-defense. Mackenzie's memory loss, however, meant the case was at a standstill. The only witness remembered nothing. Investigators then began interviewing family members on both sides, and unexpectedly, they received two completely contradictory accounts. Mackenzie's mother said her daughter and Russo had a great relationship. They were planning to get married, and she had never heard of any breakup. But Russo's mother told a very different story. She said the relationship had been deteriorating for the past 6 months. The couple argued constantly. Things had even turned physical at times. Mackenzie, she said, was extremely possessive. If Russo so much as spoke to another girl, Mackenzie would lash out and make things difficult for him. In particular, during the month of July, tensions had flared. There had been 2 major fights, both intense and volatile. In one of them, which took place at home, Russo had locked Mackenzie out of the house. She stood outside yelling and cursing while Russo recorded the entire scene on his phone. That argument eventually ended on a bitter note. Another serious conflict occurred on July 17th. Russo had called his mother, saying that he and Mackenzie had gotten into a fight while driving on Interstate 71. His mother, worried, asked her friend Martin to go check on them. When Martin arrived, he found the two of them physically fighting inside the car. Afterward, Russo was visibly upset and confided that he could no longer tolerate Mackenzie's controlling behavior. He said he was planning to break up with her. Russo's older brother also confirmed that their relationship had been turbulent. For a while, frequent breakups and reconciliations. But in July, Russo had made it clear he wanted to end things for good. Medical staff who treated Mackenzie after the crash revealed that once she regained consciousness, she was overcome with guilt and self-blame. She kept saying it was her fault her boyfriend had died. Because of this, her claim of memory loss may not have been genuine, it might have been an act. In light of this, police officially reclassified the incident from a traffic accident to a criminal investigation. But with limited concrete evidence, their only available option was to place Mackenzie under covert surveillance. Then came a shift in the case, one that would dramatically change the way police saw her. On August 6, 2022, Mackenzie sent a message to Russo's older brother. She asked him to place a few of their photos inside Russo's coffin, saying she hoped that way he could stay with her forever. 2 days later, on the day of Russo's funeral, Mackenzie posted an emotional tribute online. "I love you, my baby. I'll always remember you." On August 24th, she uploaded a photo of the two of them at Universal Studios with the caption, "I miss you. Sometimes it feels like you'll walk through the door any minute and look at me. I miss your smile. You had the perfect smile." Around that time, she also messaged Russo's mother, claiming again she had no memory of the accident, but promised to share anything she might later recall. Throughout August, Mackenzie continued to post photos of her and Russo, each accompanied by heartfelt, grief-filled captions. These emotional messages painted the image of a devastated young woman mourning the love of her life. The posts were so convincing that investigators began to reconsider the need for surveillance. They were close to calling it off. But then things changed drastically. Shortly after being discharged from the hospital, Mackenzie's life appeared to snap back into place. She landed a job at a modeling agency in Los Angeles and soon began posting vibrant photos online celebrating Halloween, attending events, smiling brightly, full of energy. The grieving girlfriend seemed to vanish overnight. This sudden emotional shift stunned the detectives. The girl they'd seen crying at the hospital now looked like someone entirely different. Their initial plan to halt the surveillance was scrapped. Instead, the investigation went even deeper and became even more discreet. After weeks of quiet digging, police uncovered more about Mackenzie's background. She had been spoiled from a young age, raised in a household where she always got what she wanted. This constant indulgence had gradually shaped her into someone who believed she was entitled to everything she desired. At just 15, when her parents once refused her a request, she attempted suicide. At the time, authorities recommended psychological counseling, but her parents brushed it off, laughing and dismissing it as teenage drama. To this day, her psychological issues had never been properly addressed. In fact, over time, they only grew worse. On top of that, Mackenzie had a long history of substance abuse. She had even publicly posted on social media that she was the kind of person who could take a ton of drugs and still be fine. Clearly, there was something deeply unstable in her. After a long period of surveillance and investigation, police finally uncovered a critical piece of evidence. GPS data from Mackenzie's phone revealed that 2 days before the accident on July 28th, she had been near the crash site. This immediately raised red flags. The location of the crash was remote, rugged, and hadn't been maintained for a long time. It was an area people rarely visited, especially not someone like Mackenzie. Even on the day of the crash, that road was not part of her usual route home. Investigators began to suspect that her appearance there 2 days earlier wasn't a coincidence. It looked like she had been scouting the location. That isolated, dangerous stretch of road might have been a calculated choice. All of this pointed to one conclusion. The accident had been meticulously planned. It was, in fact, a premeditated murder. The price to pay once everything came to light, Mackenzie was arrested and charged with 12 criminal counts, including murder. In court, the prosecution laid out all the evidence they had, one piece at a time. Although there were no direct eyewitnesses, the case was supported by surveillance footage from the area, GPS tracking data from Mackenzie's phone, vehicle telemetry, showing the throttle had been fully pressed leading up to the crash, and witness testimonies confirming repeated, intense conflicts between Mackenzie and Russo. All of these came together to form a comprehensive chain of evidence. Facing the mounting, proof Mackenzie showed no emotion. Throughout the trial, she would casually fix her hair, glance at her nails, and sway back and forth in her seat, completely unbothered, almost as if none of this had anything to do with her. At one point after her arrest, she reportedly told the police they could just suspend her driver's license for 10 years and call it even as if 2 lives hadn't been lost. The prosecution highlighted a critical point. When applying for her driver's license, Mackenzie had never disclosed any medical or mental health conditions. Moreover, at the moment of the crash, the steering wheel had been turned and the gear had been shifted, even as the vehicle crashed violently off-road. And yet, her foot remained pressed firmly on the accelerator. These were not the actions of someone who had fainted. The defense argued that the surveillance footage, GPS data, and car diagnostics weren't enough to convict her, that perhaps Mackenzie hadn't wanted to live anymore either, since the force of the crash could have easily killed her too. But the prosecutor countered that the surveillance video clearly exposed Mackenzie's intentions. She had deliberately chosen to drive at around 5:30 in the morning, down a remote and treacherous road, far from help, at a time when no one would be around, to witness or rescue. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a cold, calculated execution, and the notion of her being suicidal could not be used as a defense for murder. There was also another crucial detail. Mackenzie was born on August 2nd, 2004. That meant, at the time of the crime, she was just 2 days shy of turning 18. Prosecutors believed she had chosen the date carefully, wanting to commit the act while still technically underage, hoping it would spare her from harsher punishment. But given the devastating consequences, 2 lives lost, the court ruled that she would be tried as an adult, not as a juvenile. Perhaps hoping to sway the judge emotionally, Mackenzie delivered a heartfelt statement during her final opportunity to speak. She said she was deeply remorseful and kept insisting she had no memory of what happened that day. As the moment of sentencing approached, tension in the courtroom reached its peak. Some attendees hoped the judge would deliver a harsh punishment. Davion's mother, whose son had simply been a passenger that day, made a quiet but powerful plea. She wasn't seeking revenge, only justice for her innocent boy. The prosecution also played several videos showing Mackenzie partying and attending concerts after her release from the hospital, clear proof that she had shown no signs of trauma or emotional distress related to the crash. Still, there were those who hoped the court would show her some leniency, including Russo's own father. He expressed remarkable forgiveness, saying Mackenzie was still very young and that a conviction and prison sentence would forever alter not only her life, but also the lives of her entire family. On August 14, 2023, after 4 days of trial, the judge delivered the final verdict. He stated that when Mackenzie drove up that remote road, she had a clear objective in mind and carried out her plan with precision. What began as a personal conflict between her and Russo tragically pulled in an innocent bystander, Davion, who had only asked for a ride. But to Mackenzie, the loss of a human life was no more significant than tossing away a suitcase. She showed no regard for the lives of others. Her actions were calculated, deliberate, and intentional. This wasn't an unfortunate accident, it was murder. As a result, the judge upheld all 12 charges against Mackenzie and sentenced her to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. When the sentence was read, Mackenzie's demeanor changed entirely. The smile vanished from her face, panic and fear flooded her expression, tears streamed down her cheeks. According to body language experts, the way she shook her head wasn't an expression of remorse, it was denial. Her tears, they said, weren't for the lives lost, but for herself. Deep down, Mackenzie still refused to admit that she had committed murder. Although the trial had come to an end, the final verdict sparked widespread debate. Some believed the sentence allowing for parole after just 15 years was too lenient, especially when compared to penalties typically given to male offenders. The question of whether female criminals received lighter treatment became a hot topic online. Many argued that anyone responsible for the deaths of 2 people should remain behind bars for life, not be given the chance to walk free at 34. However, others believed that Mackenzie genuinely had no recollection of what happened during the crash. To them, she was still a child not fully developed, not truly capable of understanding the weight of her actions. They argued that she should be forgiven, and that it was wrong to destroy the entire future of someone so young. Some even went further, blaming her parents. It was their excessive indulgence, they said, that had created Mackenzie's unstable personality and distorted values. Even as Mackenzie was escorted out of the courtroom, her parents shouted that she was innocent. Her mother kept searching for excuses to defend her, refusing to accept that her daughter bore any responsibility. The truth of what Mackenzie really felt when she pressed her foot down on the gas pedal and drove toward that crash may remain a mystery forever. But the court's final decision stood as the strongest reflection of justice the legal system could offer, a response to a tragedy born out of emotional turmoil, youth, and recklessness. The man you see in the video above is known as Zhang Fu. He began his scamming career in his youth and, over more than a decade, committed over 100 crimes across 7 provinces in China. More than 30 of these cases were serious offenses, including murder and armed robbery. Altogether, he stole over 730,000 yuan. However, despite being such a dangerous criminal, Zhang received a temporary stay of execution from the Supreme Court just before his scheduled execution. What's even more shocking is that not only was the execution delayed, but during the trial, a major criminal gang responsible for 9 murders was also exposed. The story begins at 9:50 a.m. on October 23, 2003, at the Coastal Bank's Agricultural Division branch in Jinxiang City. A private business owner named Sai Mo had just earned some money through an online transaction and planned to withdraw an additional 500,000 yuan for further investment. However, since the branch didn't have enough cash on hand, he only received 200,000 yuan. He placed the money into a cloth bag he had brought with him. Sai Mo then exited the bank's transaction room with his driver, Xiang Mo. But what he didn't know was that a pair of criminal eyes had been watching him for quite some time. As they approached their car, a chilling voice suddenly rang out from behind. "Don't make a sound or I'll shoot. Hand over the money." Startled, Sai Mo instinctively turned around and saw two men wearing baseball caps, both pointing guns at them. Before he could react, one of the men pulled the trigger. A gunshot rang out. Sai Mo fell to the ground and died instantly. His driver, Xiang, was also shot and collapsed. The two assailants quickly grabbed the money bag from Xiang's hands, climbed over a wall, and escaped from the scene. The parking area had only one exit, and the surrounding three sides were blocked by tall advertising boards, so no one nearby saw what happened. Luckily, a resident on a high floor who happened to be enjoying the breeze by the window witnessed the entire murder-robbery and immediately called the police. The crime scene was only a few hundred meters from the city's public security bureau. Within just 1 minute of receiving the call, police arrived at the scene, cordoned off the area, provided medical aid to the injured, and launched their investigation. At first, police suspected that the killer had been hired by a business rival of Sai Mo, but they quickly ruled out that theory. Upon reviewing surveillance footage from the past few days, they noticed a suspicious individual who had shown up multiple times at the bank without conducting any transactions. The police concluded that this was a premeditated and opportunistic bank robbery. As such, the man was identified as a key suspect. However, due to the low resolution of the surveillance footage, the suspect's facial features couldn't be clearly seen. The footage was then sent to Beijing for further analysis. Meanwhile, driver Xiang survived after emergency treatment at the hospital. From his testimony, the police gathered physical descriptions of the two suspects. Most notably, one of them spoke with a northeastern accent, a detail that caught investigators' attention. Immediately, more than 3,000 officers were mobilized across the city to conduct a comprehensive investigation. After an intense 24 hours of work, police finally identified the two suspects, Zhang Fu and Jiang Ahong. According to the investigation, Zhang Fu was 28 years old and from Baiquan Town in Chiharap City. Jiang Ahong, a 25-year-old woman, was from Keshan County, also within Chiharap City. Around April 2003, the two had traveled to Qinhuangdao and were living together at the home of Jiang Ahong's older brother in Hongguang South Street. Haigang District Police immediately moved to surveil the brothers' residence and successfully caught Jiang returning from the suburbs. However, during interrogation, her brother claimed he knew nothing about the couple's crimes. He said they had already left Qinhuangdao for Changchun on the morning of the 25th. Still, he recalled that a few days before the crime, Zhang Fu had brought two fellow townsmen home, but he didn't know their real names, only their nicknames, Li and Old Wang. Afterward, the police showed Jiang Ahong the security footage from the bank to confirm identities, and she verified that the man in the video was indeed Li, the same man seen observing inside the bank's transaction hall on the morning of October 23rd, the very day the crime occurred. Once the suspect's identity was confirmed, the police quickly contacted the Chiharap City Police Department to verify the true identities of Li and Old Wang. It turned out they were fugitives wanted for several crimes in their local area. In response, the Qinhuangdao police formed an arrest team and traveled to both Changchun and Chiharap, informing the Heilongjiang Provincial Police and requesting their cooperation in apprehending the suspects. With the help of the Heilongjiang Police, on the morning of October 28th, Li was arrested while riding a long-distance bus departing from Chiharap. Upon his arrest, he confessed to the murder and robbery in Qinhuangdao and named his three accomplices, Zhang Fu, Old Wang, real name Wang Hongwei, and Jiang Ahong. He revealed that after the crime, they evenly split the 200,000 yuan and each fled in different directions. Following this lead, the police rushed to Chiharap and successfully arrested the suspect Wang Hongwei, also known as Old Wang. However, Zhang Fu and Jiang Ahong seemed to have sensed something and did not show up at the agreed location. This led the police to launch a large-scale investigation, gradually uncovering more and more clues. Still, 8 long months passed without any trace of the remaining 2 suspects. It wasn't until June 11, 2004, that the police finally received promising news, a tip-off that Zhang Fu and his wife had been spotted in Dongying City, Shandong Province. The police immediately moved in. Li Jianying, Li Er, had also warned investigators that Zhang Fu was extremely ruthless. He always carried a fully loaded pistol and would never hesitate to fire. He was the kind of person who would rather die than let his enemies live. Because of Zhang Fu's dangerous nature, the police knew they couldn't risk a direct confrontation. They had to stage a surprise ambush to subdue him quickly and safely. After several days of surveillance, the officers finally identified the perfect location for an ambush. At around 11 a.m. on June 17th, when Zhang Fu and another individual left their rented apartment, 2 officers disguised as sanitation workers positioned themselves at a strategic spot. They launched a sudden attack and successfully arrested both individuals, immediately seizing a fully loaded handgun Zhang had been carrying. A second, smaller pistol was also found inside the rented home. With this, all 4 suspects involved in the robbery-murder case were in custody. According to Zhang Fu's confession, he had arrived in Qinhuangdao in April 2003. Without a stable income, he began contemplating robbery. On October 23rd, Li Jianying happened to see the victim, Sai Mo, filling out a withdrawal form for 500,000 yuan. He immediately informed Zhang Fu and Wang Hongwei, who then waited in the parking lot, leading to the brutal scene of murder and robbery, described at the start of this story. As for the weapon used in the crime, Zhang and Wang had obtained the gun from a pawn shop. In 2004, Zhang Fu, Li Jianying, and Wang Hongwei were all sentenced to death, while Jiang Ahong received a life sentence, as she had not directly participated in the murders. However, just before the execution date, Wang Hongwei unexpectedly reported that Zhang Fu had also committed a triple homicide in Changchun. Upon receiving this accusation, the police immediately re-interrogated Zhang Fu. He admitted that on June 7, 2004, he had broken into the home of a woman named Luan Bing and murdered her boyfriend, and a housemaid. Due to the severity of the crime, the Qinhuangdao police urgently contacted the authorities in Changchun. However, the Changchun police revealed that when the crime occurred, all 3 victims were found tied up with ropes, their mouths sealed, with colored tape, and their bodies bore wounds consistent with attacks from sharp weapons. The scene suggested multiple attackers, and evidence at the scene confirmed it. It was clear that Zhang Fu could not have committed the murders alone. As a result, the case was immediately reported to the Supreme Court in hopes of reopening it for retrial. On September 1, 2005, at exactly 7:30 a.m., Zhang Fu was just moments away from execution. He had already been given a sedative in preparation for lethal injection. But at the last minute, a phone call from the Supreme Court ordered the execution to be suspended. Zhang Fu was taken back to the courtroom for judgment once again. The next day, under intense pressure from the police, Zhang Fu finally confessed that he, along with Wu Zhenfang and Jiang Ahong, had murdered Wang Luanbing, her boyfriend, and her housemaid. According to Zhang Fu's statement, in May 2004, he and Jiang Ahong traveled to Changtan and stayed with Jiang's older brother, Wu Zhenfang. Struggling with financial difficulties, the trio continuously looked for ways to make money. On June 3rd, Zhang Fu came across a rental listing in the newspaper, and that's when an idea struck him. He planned to use the pretense of renting a home to get close to wealthy landlords. If the landlord turned out to be rich, he would carry out a robbery and murder if necessary. His chosen target was Wang Luanbing. After several encounters, Zhang Fu realized Wang Luanbing was indeed wealthy. So he and Wu Zhenfang prepared 2 Dongfeng brand pistols, knives, and other tools, such as a wooden hammer and white nylon rope. On June 7th, they went to Wang Luanbing's house. After exchanging polite greetings, the trio pulled their guns and subdued the 3 victims, tying them up. While searching, they found an agricultural bank debit card, a savings passbook with a balance of 290,000 yuan and over 800 yuan in cash in Wang Luanbing's handbag. After forcing her to reveal the PIN, Zhang Fu instructed Wu Zhenfang to guard the victims while he and Jiang Ahong went out to withdraw the money. However, when Zhang tried to withdraw the funds, he realized the password was incorrect. Furious, He called Wu Zhenfang and ordered him to force Wang Luanbing to give up the correct pin, or he would kill all three. Faced with a gun to her head, Wang Luanbing had no choice but to give in. Zhang Fu managed to withdraw over 40,000 yuan and hurried back to the house. The reason he didn't withdraw more wasn't because he wanted to save the rest, it was because daily ATM limits only allowed 50,000 yuan to be withdrawn in one day. After taking the cash, Zhang Fu returned to the house by taxi, and together with Wu Zhenfang, they executed all three victims. After the murders, they didn't flee immediately. Instead, they checked into a nearby hotel to continue watching Wang Luanbing's house, planning to withdraw more money the following day. Around 4 p.m., however, they spotted a police car approaching the property. Realizing that the savings passbook was now useless, they quickly fled Changtan. Because of Zhang Fu's pattern of behavior, the police suspected he might be connected to other crimes. They intensified their investigations and interrogations. Eventually, Zhang Fu admitted that since his youth, he had been involved in thefts and violent crimes. Over the past 10 years, he had committed over 100 criminal acts across 7 provinces, including more than 30 major cases involving murder and robbery. In particular, police investigations over the last 2 years showed that Zhang's gang had used firearms in crimes across Chiharup, Changchun, Dalian, Panshan, Qinhuangdao, Guilin, and Kunming. These crimes resulted in 9 deaths and netted over 730,000 yuan, 7,000 US dollars, 2.5 kilograms of gold, 2 Jeep vehicles, and 2 small-caliber firearms. The scale and brutality of the crimes stunned investigators, who couldn't comprehend how Zhang had managed to evade law enforcement for so long. According to Zhang Fu's account, in the spring of 2001, he was placed on the wanted list by Chiharup, police for seriously injuring someone during a robbery. With no way out, he fled his hometown with Jiang Ahong and escaped to Changchun. But they spent money recklessly, and soon their stolen funds ran dry. So they began plotting another robbery this time, targeting individuals who had just withdrawn large sums from the bank. In July 2001, Jiang Ahong identified a new target, an elderly man who had just deposited 120,000 yuan at a savings bank. Zhang Fu followed the man home and learned his address. He then reached out to 2 acquaintances from his hometown, Wang Hongwei and Li Jianying. After Zhang shared his plan, the 3 men agreed to act that very night. They broke into the elderly man's house and forced him to hand over his savings passbook. However, whether due to the violent assault or the frailty of the victim's body, the man died before revealing the passcode. In the end, the trio not only failed to obtain any money, they also left behind a murder scene. Too afraid to remain in the area, the 3 quickly fled to Qinhuangdao. On the morning of December 11, 2002, at around 9 a.m., Zhang Fu and his gang returned to their old ways. Their target this time was a female accountant from a construction company in Qinhuangdao who had just withdrawn money from the bank. They quietly followed her, murdered her, and made off with over 50,000 yuan. On April 7, 2003, Zhang Fu, Li Jianying, and Wang Hongwei were in the Jianhua district of Chiharup, once again looking for a target near the Xinlong Postal Bank. When they spotted Wang Tuantang withdrawing a large amount of cash, they decided to tail him. Li Jianying followed Wang all the way into a men's restroom. There, he pulled out a small-caliber handgun and fired 3 consecutive shots at close range, killing Wang on the spot and stealing 112,500 yuan in cash. The 3 men then fled immediately to Qinhuangdao. After 6 months, Zhang Fu felt that public attention and the police investigation had cooled down. With their stolen money nearly depleted, they decided to return to their hometown in northeast China. On December 23rd, they carried out another robbery and murder in Qinhuangdao, taking a total of 200,000 yuan. This time, Li Jianying and Wang Hongwei were arrested, but for reasons known only to him, perhaps believing the most dangerous place was also the safest, Zhang Fu chose to stay behind. Only 6 months later, in April 2004, Zhang Fu and Jiang Ahong returned to the criminal scene, carrying out 2 armed robberies and murders in Qinhuangdao, taking away more than 80,000 yuan. After that, they quietly slipped back to Changchun. On June 7th, they began plotting the murder of Wang Luanbing's entire household. What Zhang Fu didn't expect, however, was that within just 10 days, both he and Jiang Ahong would be arrested in Shandong. Zhang Fu knew that once he was caught, he had no hope of survival. So he told Jiang Ahong, "If I'm arrested, blame everything on me." But his cleverness backfired. Not only did Jiang Ahong get exposed, but in the process, she accidentally revealed another member of their gang, Wu Zhenfang. What surprised the police most was that even without any solid leads, Wu Zhenfang ended up delivering himself to them. In November 2005, Wu Zhenfang secretly returned to Changchun and sought out Zhang Fu's older brother, Zhang Jun, in hopes of planning another robbery. What he didn't know was that Zhang Jun had been under police surveillance for some time. On the morning of December 22nd, as Wu Zhenfang and Zhang Jun were preparing to rob a postal bank in Quancheng district, the police were already waiting. Both men were arrested on the spot. The police found 2 pistols and 49 rounds of ammunition on them. With that, every last member of Zhang Fu's gang was finally captured. After their trials, Zhang Fu, Jiang Ahong, and Wu Zhenfang were all sentenced to death, and their executions were carried out immediately. Justice was served, and the violent, lawless rampage of those who wanted to live without working came to an end. The old saying goes, "Better to be clean in poverty than dirty in riches." Today we're diving into a gruesome murder case that took place on Valentine's Day 1999 in Tuen Mun Village, Hong Kong. A man was brutally murdered inside his own apartment, and what's even more horrifying is that the killer dismembered the victim's body into pieces. The news spread like wildfire through the community, leaving everyone shaken and terrified. So who was the killer? Why did they carry out such a cruel act? Let's find out together. The Tuen Mun police received a phone call from a man reporting that his friend had been missing for several days. He feared something terrible might have happened to him and asked the police to investigate. Acting on this report, officers went to an apartment building in Tai Hing Village, Tuen Mun, Hong Kong, where the missing man lived. As soon as they arrived at the front door, a strong, foul odor hit them. The officers immediately knew something was wrong. Without hesitation, they broke the lock and entered the apartment. Inside, the scene was chaotic. Bloodstains were splattered across the floors and walls. But what really caught the officers' attention was a rusty, old metal chest placed in the middle of the room. When they opened it, the entire police team recoiled in shock. A man in his 20s was curled up inside, missing his left arm and left leg. His body had been covered with a large amount of salt, clearly an attempt by the killer to slow down decomposition. According to the man who made the report, the victim's name was Chung Wai Man. A few days before the discovery of the body, Chung had suddenly gone out of contact with everyone. Even more suspicious, the lock on his apartment door had been changed. Once the situation became clear, the police immediately expanded their search to the entire area surrounding the apartment. Eventually, they found another part of the victim's remains in a pile of trash. Through their investigation, police learned that Chung Wai Man was a very introverted person. His daily life revolved around working at a tea house, then returning home to keep to himself. No one had ever heard of him having conflicts, fights, or any history of violence. What's more, there were no signs of forced entry at any of the doors or windows. That meant the killer had most likely come through the front door. This led the police to suspect that the killer was someone the victim knew. Based on this new lead, the police shifted their focus to Chung Wai Man's girlfriend, Di Pao Wan. An arrest warrant was immediately issued and a full-scale manhunt was launched across the region. However, by that time, Di Pao Wan had already vanished without a trace. Just as the investigation seemed to be hitting a dead end, a man suddenly walked into the police station and voluntarily confessed to having played a part in the case. His name was Lau Quan Hua, Di Pao Wan's ex-boyfriend. A few days earlier, Di had called Lau, asking him to help her transport some items to Yuan Long. Believing it was just a routine favor, Lau agreed without hesitation. Everything went smoothly at first and there were no red flags. But on their way back, Di suddenly told him that she had accidentally broken a knife that belonged to a friend, and she needed to buy a replacement. After returning to Tuen Mun, Lao Quanhua went out and bought a new knife for her, thinking nothing of it. It wasn't until he saw the wanted poster that it hit him he may have unknowingly assisted a murderer. Shocked and overwhelmed, Lao tried calling Dee, but she didn't answer. Feeling helpless and desperate to stop someone he once loved from. Making things worse, he did the only thing he could. He turned her in. Using the information provided by Lao, the police quickly tracked down Dee Paowan's hideout. They surrounded the area and launched a swift operation. On February 26th, she was arrested and brought back to the station. The news of her arrest sent shockwaves through the entire Hong Kong community. No one could believe that a young and beautiful girl like her could be the one behind such a cold-blooded murder. But the roots of this tragedy could be traced back 5 years earlier, in 1994. At the time, Dee Paowan was just a 14-year-old high school student. Because of her good looks, she caught the eye of a talent scout from the entertainment industry. They invited her to film commercials, which quickly made her a local celebrity in Tuen Mun. Her sudden fame drew the attention of many admirers. Men started pursuing her, but she rejected them all until one day, a chubby young man managed to win her heart. A schoolmate of Jewel Dee worked part-time at a tea house every weekend. One day she visited friends there and happened to meet Victor Zhang, a server at the tea house. From the moment he saw her, Victor was deeply struck by Jewel's beauty. He soon reached out to her through a mutual friend, and over time, they grew close. Victor often invited Jewel and her friends to hang out at his apartment. Jewel, young and inexperienced, didn't think much of it. To her, it was just harmless fun and friendship. But what she didn't realize was that Victor had harbored sinister intentions toward her from the start. One day, when they were alone, Victor forcibly assaulted her. In such a situation, most people would report it to the police, but Jewel, instead of going to the authorities, made the shocking choice to start a romantic relationship with Victor. A few months later, Jewel began feeling unwell and visited a hospital. There, she discovered she was pregnant. Too young to confide in her parents, she turned to Victor for support. But when she told him about the pregnancy, he callously denied responsibility and demanded she get an abortion. The doctor warned them that Jewel, not yet 15 and still physically immature, could face life-threatening risks from the procedure. Terrified by this, Victor reluctantly agreed to let her keep the baby. In May 1995, Jewel gave birth to a son, whom she named Brave Rain Zhang. Still a minor and a student, she was clearly unprepared to raise a child and pinned her hopes on Victor. But even the sight of their adorable son didn't soften him. Victor decided to abandon the baby at the hospital gates. Jewel's desperate, tearful pleas finally forced him to agree to let the child stay in their home. During this time, Jewel Dee juggled raising her son and continuing her studies. She gave up her chance at university to care for Brave Rain, and this sacrifice planted the seeds of resentment in her heart. As they lived together, Victor Zhang's true colors emerged. His fiery temper led to frequent shouting matches, and he even physically lashed out at Jewel. Their relationship began to crack under the strain, and Jewel grew to regret staying with him. Desperate to escape, she started hiding her identity as a single mother and secretly dated other men. On Lunar New Year's Eve in 1998, Jewel met a taxi driver named Bright Liu at a market. They quickly fell head over heels, but fearing Victor would find out, Jewel broke things off after a few months. Throughout their romance, Bright remained unaware of her past or that she was the mother of a 3-year-old. After the breakup, he continued to pine for her, but Jewel, unfazed, moved on to a new chapter. One evening at a street food stall in Yellow Haven Port, she crossed paths with a firefighter named Steadfast Stone. Once again, Jewel sparked a secret romance with him. But Victor began to notice a shift in her behavior. She no longer doted on their son as she once did, and her demeanor grew colder. Suspecting infidelity, Victor's doubts fueled frequent arguments between them. On February 9, 1999, Victor invited his friend Loyal Liu out for drinks. Over their conversation, Victor shared his suspicions about Jewel and sought advice. In truth, Loyal had seen Jewel with other men, acting intimately on multiple occasions, but had kept quiet to avoid ruining their relationship. When Victor pressed him, Loyal could no longer hold back. He candidly revealed everything he knew, even showing Victor photos of Jewel with other men. Hearing this, Victor's rage boiled over. He couldn't believe that after years together, his girlfriend had betrayed him. Feeling his pride as a man shattered, he resolved to confront Jewel and settle things once and for all. As expected, when Jewel D and Victor Zhang met, their conversation quickly erupted into conflict. Victor began attacking Jewel, and in a desperate bid to defend herself, she grabbed whatever was within reach: knives, an iron hammer, even a chair. Her fierce resistance caught Victor off guard. He never imagined the usually docile Jewel could fight back with such ferocity. Overwhelmed, Victor was soon knocked to the ground. Blinded by years of pent-up rage, Jewel unleashed all her suppressed pain and resentment, striking him relentlessly. Only when her emotions settled did she realize the gravity of her actions. But it was too late. Victor lay dead at her feet. Panicked, Jewel knew she had to dispose of the body as quickly as possible. But as a first-time killer, she was at a loss for where to start. After careful thought, she turned to Bright Liu for help. Despite their breakup, Bright had never stopped caring for her, and they had stayed in touch. It was only now that he learned the woman he loved was a single mother, and now a murderer. The police later discovered that Bright's initial statement wasn't entirely truthful. At first, he tried to convince Jewel to turn herself in, but she broke down, recounting the years of abuse she endured from Victor. Moved by her story, Bright not only abandoned his efforts to persuade her, but also sympathized deeply and agreed to help her dispose of Victor's body. He saw a personal gain in this. Without Victor, he believed he could rekindle their romance. Unbeknownst to him, Jewel was already involved with another man, and Bright was merely a tool in her scheme. They planned to bury Victor's body first and later find a chance to dump it elsewhere, but their plan unraveled when Bright unexpectedly reported the crime to the police. Realizing he couldn't continue down this criminal path, Bright turned himself in, a decision that spared him from legal consequences. According to Loyal Liu, during the time of the incident, he had visited Victor Zhang's home, but was turned away by Jewel D. He heard Victor's cries for help, but hesitated to call the police, fearing it would stir trouble for his friend, especially since he knew the couple had been clashing recently. As an outsider, Loyal didn't want to meddle too deeply in their family affairs, so he chose not to report anything. It wasn't until days later, when he couldn't reach Victor, that he grew alarmed and finally contacted the authorities. If Loyal had acted sooner, he might have saved Victor's life. The forensic report revealed that while Victor's body bore numerous wounds, none were severe enough to be fatal. The true cause of death was excessive blood loss. Although Jewel had killed someone, her actions were deemed impulsive, driven by rage. In 2000, the court convicted her of manslaughter and illegal disposal of a body, sentencing her to 10 years in prison. Despite the decade behind bars, Jewel would only be 30 upon release, and she clung to dreams of remarrying and building a better life. The ordeal, however, left a deep scar on her once obedient son, Brave Rain Zhang. Previously a bright, kind, and studious boy, he became withdrawn and rebellious. He lost interest in school, spent his days wandering aimlessly, and eventually veered onto a dark path. Brave Rain was later convicted of aiding drug traffickers and sentenced to 5 years and 8 months in prison. If Jewel had sought justice through the law when Victor assaulted her years ago, their story might have unfolded differently. Perhaps she and her son would have been spared the tragic fate that led them both to prison, and such a bitter end. This is a dark and horrifying tale, one of the most infamous cases in all of China, steeped in an indescribable terror. At the heart of this story is a ruthless monster, a cannibalistic demon. But what makes this figure truly terrifying isn't just his murderous nature, it's the chronic, agonizing headaches that plagued him. For years, he endured unbearable pain with no cure in sight, until he stumbled upon a grotesque folk remedy. Consuming human brains could heal all ailments. From that moment, a true nightmare began. The grim fate of 12 souls was sealed forever in this horror. What sent shivers down the spines of those following the case was the identity of the victims, not just strangers, but neighbors, loved ones, and familiar faces he passed daily on the streets of his hometown. It all started with a single phone call to the police station in Harbin, Heilongjiang Province in 1993. The case was so severe that officers rushed to the scene to investigate. The victim was an elderly scavenger, and following the caller's tip, police discovered parts of the man's body stuffed inside a black woven sack. Examination revealed the remains weren't preserved in chemicals, and the cuts were sloppy, ruling out the possibility of a medical dissection. This was no accident, it was a brutal murder and dismemberment, a crime of chilling magnitude. The Harbin police immediately formed a special task force to tackle the case. The first step was to locate the remaining parts of the victim's body. Hundreds of officers scoured nearby areas, and their efforts quickly paid off. They found another woven sack not far from the initial crime scene, containing the torso of a man. But just as the police thought they could move forward, the coroner's words stopped them cold. The head and torso didn't belong to the same person. The skin tones and stages of decomposition were starkly different. In other words, at least, two men had been savagely killed and dismembered. Based on the cuts at the neck and the type of woven sack, the police were confident the same killer was responsible for both murders. The remaining body parts were likely scattered in nearby dumps, or the city's communal waste sites. The task force sealed off all local landfills and trash bins, launching a massive search with hundreds of volunteers to comb through the refuse for the missing remains. After a grueling week, they uncovered more body parts, but what no one could have anticipated was this. When the pieces were assembled, they belonged to 5 different people, 2 men, 2 women, and a 13-year-old girl. 4 of the adults had been stabbed through the skull with a sharp object, their brain tissue missing. The young girl had been strangled to death. Further examination revealed the 5 victims had died at different times. The man and woman, both, around 30, had been killed 2 months prior, while the other 3 had died about a month ago. During a case briefing, one officer's memory was jogged. A month earlier, the station had received a missing persons report about a family of 3. The caller said his older brother and sister-in-law had vanished. The brother, named Jian Li, was 42 and owned a photography studio. One day, the studio was found eerily empty, with no one managing it. His sister-in-law hadn't shown up to work in a week, and their daughter was nowhere to be found. Sensing something was terribly wrong, Jian Li's younger brother had alerted the police. The police searched Jian Li's home, hoping to uncover clues, but found nothing suspicious. No signs of a struggle, no bloodstains, not even missing valuables. With no direct evidence to justify a criminal investigation, they had no choice but to classify the case as a missing persons report, filed away with countless others. But now, as they investigated this new, gruesome case, the similarities in location and timing between the 2 incidents caught their attention. The special task force reached out to Jian Li's younger brother, asking him to come to the station for identification. The results were chilling. 3 of the 5 victims were indeed Jian Li's family, not just murdered but dismembered and discarded in the city's trash heaps. This was no ordinary robbery homicide. The meticulous handling of the bodies suggested a deep-seated grudge against the victims. Following this lead, the police shifted their focus to individuals who might have had conflicts with Jian Li. According to his brother, Jian Li had no bitter enemies. A former wrestling champion who'd won a gold medal, Jian Li had a rebellious streak in his youth, often getting into fights and even assaulting others, so the possibility of an old grudge wasn't entirely out of the question. Still, any disputes seemed too minor to be called true vendettas. Nevertheless, adhering to their principle of leaving no stone unturned, the police tracked down those who'd clashed with Jian Li in the past. As expected, none harbored deep resentment, and even if they'd wanted revenge, they wouldn't have resorted to such extreme measures. Each had solid alibis, and the police quickly ruled them out as suspects. With the identities of the other 2 victims still unknown, the investigation hit a dead end. Under the guidance of the Special Task Force, forensic experts conducted a second autopsy and uncovered disturbing anomalies. The skulls of Jian Li's family had been shattered with a heavy object, like a hammer or axe, causing fatal fractures and spilling brain matter. The other 2 victims' skulls, however, were riddled with puncture wounds, as if the killer had repeatedly hacked at their heads with a sharp tool, possibly an axe. In typical dismemberment cases, killers might sever and discard heads, but going to the lengths of cracking open skulls and removing brains was unusual, laborious, and time-consuming. Seasoned forensic experts began to recall a case from over a decade ago in northeast China. A militia soldier, plagued by a chronic illness, had heard a rumor that eating the brains of living people could cure him. He killed and cannibalized his victims. Though the story sounded far-fetched, the police couldn't dismiss the possibility that the killer they were now hunting shared a similar motive. The killer's methods were so brutal and calculated that the police suspected this wasn't his first crime. They shifted their approach, mobilizing over 200 officers to conduct a sweeping search of another city landfill. 10 days later, their efforts yielded a grim discovery: 5 more bodies. These victims' remains were different from the previous 5 burned, with their faces severely disfigured. Yet all 10 victims shared a haunting trait. After being killed, their skulls had been split open and their brains removed. With such horrifying details, the Ministry of Public Security issued an urgent directive ordering local police to resolve the case as quickly as possible. However, the investigative techniques of the time were limited, and aside from Jian Li's family, the identities of the remaining 7 victims couldn't be confirmed. 5 of the 10 bodies had been burned, their faces too disfigured to reconstruct. He recounted how his young son, playing near the village entrance, had spotted a local man named Kai Ho riding a tricycle with a black tarp covering something in the back. Curious, the boy followed the vehicle. As it hit a large pothole at the village entrance, the tricycle jolted and an object fell off, rolling into the roadside bushes. Kai Ho, unaware, kept driving. The boy ran to investigate and found, to his confusion, what he thought was a pig's leg or sheep's hoof. He brought it home to show his father, who was horrified to realize it was a human arm. Terrified, the father immediately contacted the police. Acting swiftly, the police descended on Kai Ho's home, searching every inch of his property. In his firewood shed, they uncovered a blood-stained axe, a knife, and fragments of human remains. Confronted with undeniable evidence, Kai Ho could no longer deny his crimes and confessed to his atrocities. In less than a year, he admitted to killing 12 people and consuming the brains of 7, including, shockingly, his wife of barely 4 months and her child from a previous relationship. Who was Kai Ho, and what drove him to such depravity? He revealed that before his killing spree, he'd been arrested twice for theft. Instead of returning all the stolen money, he hid a portion with a friend. After his release, he used those funds to open a barbecue restaurant, which provided him a comfortable living. But his newfound stability was short-lived. He soon developed chronic, debilitating headaches. Desperate for relief, he visited 7 or 8 major hospitals, undergoing countless tests and trying numerous medications, all to no avail. The pain only worsened. In his agony, Kai Ho recalled a childhood tale that eating human brains could cure any ailment. Unsure if it would work, but convinced he couldn't survive the pain much longer, he decided to test the gruesome theory. Thus began his horrific self-prescribed treatment. Under the pretense of hiring staff for his restaurant, Kai Ho lured victims with enticing job offers. He hired one man, whom he asked to demonstrate his cooking skills in the kitchen. While the man was preoccupied, Kai Ho grabbed a prepared axe, struck him fatally in the head, and used the same tool to crack open his skull, extracting and consuming the brain. Afterward, he dragged the body to a special kitchen area for disposal. Using the axe and a knife, he dismembered the corpse into 6 pieces. To avoid identification, he doused the remains with oil, partially burned them, then stuffed the pieces into woven sacks and dumped them in a landfill. According to Kai Ho, after eating the brain, he felt significantly better, which spurred him to continue. Using the same method, he killed 4 more employees in quick succession. Fearing that too many murders would draw police attention, he planned to pause his spree. But then, a friend named Lin visited with his girlfriend. Lin was the one who'd safeguarded Kai Ho's stolen money years earlier. The 3 drank together, and as the alcohol flowed, Kai Ho's headaches flared up. When Lin stepped out to take a phone call, Kai Ho made advances on Lin's girlfriend. She wasn't one to be trifled with. She swiftly kicked him in the groin, leaving him writhing in pain and unable to move. As Kai Ho regained his senses, rage surged through him. He grabbed a chair and smashed it over the girl's head, causing severe hemorrhaging. Not stopping there, he seized his axe and struck her skull as she lay dying. Only when he realized she was dead did he snap out of his drunken haze, struck by the gravity of what he'd done and unsure how to face Lynn. After wrestling with his thoughts, he decided to eliminate any witnesses. He dragged her body under the bed, then hid the axe in a corner, preparing for his next move. Soon, Lynn returned from his phone call. Kai-Hao lied, claiming Lynn's girlfriend had gone to the bathroom. As longtime friends, Lynn trusted him without a hint of suspicion. The EBU. Two sat down and resumed drinking. Minutes later, Kai-Ho stood, retrieved the axe, and circled behind Lynn. With a powerful swing, he buried the blade in Lynn's head, killing him instantly. Afterward, Kai-Ho consumed the brains of both victims and dismembered their bodies. Perhaps due to some psychological effect, after eating the brains of his close friend and his girlfriend, Kai-Ho's headaches vanished, leaving him with no further reason to kill. Yet by this point, murder had become an integral part of his life, a compulsion he couldn't shake. One day he spotted a provocatively dressed woman in a park and decided she was a suitable target. He approached, attempting to charm her, but as he made his move, she screamed, drawing the attention of a passerby, none other than Jian Li. A man of principle, Jian Li couldn't ignore the injustice. He charged at Kai-Ho, and a fierce brawl ensued. It was no contest. Jian Li, a champion wrestler, easily overpowered Kai-Ho, beating him black and blue until he was forced to kneel and beg for mercy. Humiliated by the thrashing, Kai-Ho harbored a burning desire for revenge. He knew a direct confrontation with Jian Li's wrestling prowess was futile, so he devised a cunning plan. One day he visited Jian Li's photography studio, spinning a tale about the park incident. He claimed the woman was his ex-girlfriend, and their argument stemmed from old grudges. Kai-Ho then lavished praise on Jian Li, admiring his bravery and fighting skills, saying he respected his sense of justice. Finally, he proposed they become friends and invited Jian Li to his barbecue restaurant for drinks. Though Jian Li had a fiery temper, he was an honest, straightforward man who didn't hold grudges. He accepted the invitation from his new friend. After hours of drinking and bonding, the two began to treat each other like brothers. A few days later, Kai-Ho invited Jian Li back to his restaurant, this time with everything prepared to end his life. But he hesitated when Jian Li mentioned he'd told his wife about their plans to meet that day. Kai-Ho feared the wife would suspect him if Jian Li went missing. After some deliberation, he decided to proceed. He killed Jian Li, then changed clothes and headed to the photography studio to eliminate Jian Li's wife. By chance, their daughter was there too. Though caught off guard, Kai-Ho quickly adjusted his plan, deciding to kill the wife first, then the daughter. How did Kai-Ho murder the mother and child? Kai-Ho began his plan with a lie, telling Jian Li's wife that her husband was at his barbecue restaurant, so drunk he was bleeding from the nose. Panicked, she rushed to the restaurant to check on him. Kai-Ho had assumed she'd bring her daughter along, but she left the young girl at home. This didn't deter his murderous intent. He killed Jian Li's wife at the restaurant, then returned to the photography studio. With little effort, he overpowered and killed the defenseless girl. In his confession, Kai-Ho also admitted to murdering a street worker. He approached her, hurling insults and degrading her for her profession, which he found repulsive. In a fit of rage, he kicked her into a river, where she drowned. Her body was never recovered, so the police charged Kai-Ho with 11 counts of murder. The monstrous killer was ultimately sentenced to death. Though he faced execution, no punishment could undo the atrocities he committed or heal the wounds of his victims' families. Kai-Ho was no human. He was a demon. Justice was served, and the families of the victims found some solace in knowing the murderer faced a fitting penalty. Yet the immense pain of their loss would linger, a scar they'd carry for life. Understanding Kai-Ho's psyche and motives reveals the critical role of awareness. Had he been rational enough to recognize the inhumanity of the so-called remedy and the devastating consequences of his actions, 12 lives might have been spared.